found a reasonable deal on QuickJacks, so I thought I'd make an upgrade to working on jack stands. They are pretty nice and offer great clearance underneath, but you can't really get at the underside of the side members at all. In addition to that, the jack points here on mine are rotted away too badly to use as a support. So I had to move the rubber support further forward and use a 2x4 so I could prop them further apart than the QuickJacks allow. Once I had that all set up, I moved underneath and started removing the clutch cable. And running parallel to that, the speedometer cable. Then I started the process of removing the shift rod that mounts to the side of the transmission by first removing the cover of the rear shift linkage. Once the cover was off, I found a bushing inside that had completely cracked apart into two pieces. If anyone knows what part this is, leave a comment. I think it's technically a bushing, not sure. On the other end of the shift rod, I loosened the screw to detach the front coupler. And then the same type of set screw in the rear. Once those were disconnected, I could push and pull the rod through the hole in the engine bar to slide it out. I think in this case it had to slide forward to get free. While I was in the area, I thought I'd see if the thermostat was any good, so I heated it up with a heat gun to see if it would expand. Fortunately, it looks like I have a working one. Next, I detached the cables on both sides to the heater controls for the heat exchangers attached to the exhaust manifolds. Then onto the transmission ground strap, where I had to use a very long extension on the ratchet to reach it. Now, I'm not sure if the solenoid cable had to be removed, since I had also detached it from the other end of the positive cable above the engine, but I thought it might be a good idea just in case. From this angle, you can get a better idea on how much room QuickJacks give you. I'm laying on a creeper here, and I think it's in the ballpark of 20 to 24 inches in height. Now I'm loosening the bolts that hold the CV joints to the transmission using a triple square bit. This is just one of the many special tools I'm finding I've needed to specifically purchase for this project. At this point, I thought it was a good idea to support the engine and transmission before I went any further. I tried to find a good balancing point between the engine and transmission and used a chunk of 2x6 to spread out the weight distribution. I might consider getting one of those Tangerine Racing engine lift plates, but $140 just for something to help drop an engine seems a little unnecessary. Two of the four bolts holding the transmission mounts to the frame are very difficult to get at. I ended up propping a box end wrench on the top of the bolt and used a ratchet to turn the nut below. In order to prevent the bolt from spinning, the box end wrench is hitting against the inside of the rear valance, and fortunately it stayed firmly in place enough for this to work out. Now I had to plan what to do with the engine after dropping it. So I measured the spacing of the heat exchangers so they would rest on these 2x4s after lowering the jack. Then in theory I could just roll the engine out. I purposely made this as slim and low to the ground as I could, thinking I might possibly not have enough height to slide it out. And it does look weak with only 3 2x4s, but one side needed to be open to slide around the jack currently supporting the engine. As an added precaution, I put jack stands in place first to support the engine bar before loosening the 2 bolts holding it to the frame. I placed a ratchet with a socket on top of a nut that you can only feel but you can't see, and I'm using another socket on the bolt below, so when I turn the bolt, the socket above hits against the frame and I can loosen it. And right here I'm seeing how much play I have before it rests on the jack stand. The other side I ended up snapping the bolt off completely before I could loosen the nut. I tried to loosen it by banging on it with a hammer, but that didn't do anything but drop rust flakes everywhere. So I had to come at it from the top instead. Fortunately, as you can see, the right engine shelf has almost disintegrated into nothing here, allowing me to pull it up out of the way so I could get a socket on top of this engine bar nut. However, it was stuck so badly I ended up rounding the nut off anyway. Ultimately, I resorted to using a Dremel with a cutting disc at this awkward angle to cut enough away so I could crack the rest off with a screwdriver. This is a perfect example of one of those annoying, unplanned things that consumes all of your time and throws off your whole plan. The only thing that you can do is make peace with the fact that this can happen at any time and be extra grateful for the times when everything goes smoothly. With that bolt off, the engine is now resting on the jack and I can lower it, but I'm finding that the starter doesn't really clear the CV axle, even with the axle being held up out of the way with the bungee cord. So before I could drop it completely, I had to disconnect it and pull the starter out of its position. Now, I was sure I was home free, but another thing I didn't predict was that the heater controls on the ends of the heat exchangers sat too wide apart to fit between the QuickJacks. So they're getting caught and preventing me from pulling the engine straight out. My solution was to lower the engine all the way down to the cart that I made and propped a jack stand on top of the jack so I could push up on the control arm to lift it just enough so that I can kick out one end of the QuickJacks. And with that, it's finally out.
And there it is.
One small milestone. Up next, I'll start tearing the engine down to the block and we'll see what we see.